When dealing with a falsehood, you're faced with two options. You can accept it or you can reject it. The basis upon which we take one of these actions is a product of our critical thinking capabilities and a desire to know what is true instead of confirming our bias. A lie can travel halfway around the world while the truth is still putting on its shoes. On Brainstorm, we choose the hard truths over the comforting lies. Reason, compassion, skepticism. This is the Brainstorm Podcast.
To those listening live or to our patrons, welcome back. To those listening weekly, welcome to the Brainstorm Rec Table, the Brainstorm production where we spend some time discussing one topic or many, depending on the way the conversation flows. This is an open brainstorming session where I kick things off with some thoughts and see where things go from there. Except this week we're doing it a little differently.
It's special.
We're actually going to have our guest, Ian Bushfield, who is joining us. He is the executive director of the BC Humanist Association, and we're going to be talking about the Trinity Western University case.
Are we going to stay on topic?
Well, we're going to try to.
Wow.
We're going to try. We'll see.
I'm here.
I'm so glad about the ambition here.
I'm excited to talk about this.
Thanks for joining us, Ian.
Yeah, thanks for having me on.
So I guess I think a good place to start is, what was the Trinity Western case about?
All right. The 15 to 45 second summary version. This evangelical law school or this evangelical university out here in British Columbia wanted to open a law school. They have a little community code that they make all their students sign that says you won't do gay stuff. Or, I mean, technically it says you won't have sex outside a traditional marriage between a man and a woman. So they went and they wanted to open this law school. So they went to all the law societies across Canada, as you have to do. And BC and Ontario said no, because we want to make sure that people who want to become lawyers, whether they're gay or straight, that doesn't matter. They should all have equal opportunity. And that's our attempt to protect the public benefit, because a diverse bar is a good bar. TW sued when they got rejected because they said you're infringing on our freedoms, our religion. And that has worked its way through various courts to the Supreme Court of Canada, the highest court in the land. And 1 week ago today, that court said, no, the Law Society's got it right. They can reject TW. And that's where we're at.
So,
I think the Law Society would do the best job of, they'd have the best legal footing.
Well, so the BC one didn't. The Ontario one did it very cleanly. The Ontario Law Society, it's like a nonprofit board where they have elected delegates of lawyers who they're the ones who made the decision. And so they debated it at their meeting, made the decision, and went with it. In BC here, the Law Society initially approved the law school. The members got super pissed, the members being all the lawyers across the province. They held this special meeting where they said you should overturn that. And 3/4, I think, of the lawyers who attended that meeting, which was over 1,000 people, I think, said you should reject it. And then the board of the Law Society here said, well, we'll put it to a referendum of all the members. So they basically had a majority vote on this issue where still 2/3 said they should reject it, and then they rejected it. So you kind of had a situation where it could be argued that this was someone's rights being decided by a majority vote, which is not great, not a great look. And they lost at lower courts on that reasons. But this Supreme Court said, for some administrative law issues that I won't get into or spend too much time on, but basically law societies can govern themselves. They're allowed to do what seems weird and silly, like hold a referendum on this and be bound by it. That's their choice. And they just gave full deference to it, which works out in this case. But
it's interesting.
Potentially there could be other situations where the amount of deference they gave to these administrative bodies could come back against human rights in a different case if you had a different body that made a bad decision. But we'll put that on a shelf for now, and we can come back to the main decision itself.
So did they need approval from all these different lawyer groups, or could their graduates now not work in BC or Ontario but work in other provinces, or do they need
It's that second one. Yeah. So they can technically open their law school. The only thing is their lawyers can't go and work in the two largest English speaking markets in the country. Right. In which case they're not as
good. And most of them probably want to be in BC, you would think, because given their...
Yeah, and it's not a big school. They were talking about having 60 spaces. And even one of their arguments was, well, this wouldn't be a big and, harm done to the LGBTQ community because it's only 60 spaces. Like, it's only a bit of discrimination. That's okay. And even the BC Court of Appeal bought that argument. And luckily the Supreme Court of Canada, when they got it, said, no, look, churning down spaces it's not a matter of the quantity. It's when you have a differential access to the bar. It's unjust.
Okay, what if they change it so that they couldn't have sex outside of marriage, but it could be same sex or straight marriage?
So this is something the Law Society of BC. Yeah, the Law Society of BC actually asked TW, would you be willing to make your covenant voluntary, or would you be willing to amend it or something like that? And TW was like, no, we're super Christian, and this is very important to us that we have this format for our covenant. Now, it turns out TW also likes to brag how they're not all Christians there. They are open to students of all faiths and none, and they brag about their religious diversity on campus, where everyone just has to agree to live by Christian standards. And so it was actually interesting in some of the dissent, or in some of the rulings made, because the justices couldn't really agree on this case. They came out with 4 different decisions, 3 that rejected the law school, and 1 that or 2 justices sided with TW. But one of the justices, Justice Malcolm Rowe, who's the newest on the court, he actually started going into this idea that if non-religious people or non-Christians are going to this school and TW has a covenant that's making them live by Christian standards, that's coercion, and that's forcing those people to be Christian.
Right. Yep.
And that's not good.
Heck no.
Like, I feel like these standards would probably be like lax for the Muslim students, right? They'd be like, you can have sex within marriage, but I can still show my face. That's awesome, or whatever. I don't know. Sorry, but whatever. Well,
and that's been raised. Is like, there's people who say, oh, this only got rejected because it's political correctness type thing, or they don't even say it that way, but it's well, I'm sure if it was a Muslim school, it would have gotten through even with a similar thing. And I mean, the arguments we took as the BC Humanist Association there apply regardless of the faith of the school. What we went and said is, you're a legal creation, a school, an institution, a bunch of bricks and mortar. You don't have a religion. You don't have beliefs. As much as you can say a society has beliefs, those beliefs are just the collection of the individuals who are part of it. And if a different board of directors comes in, say the United Church did a hostile takeover of the board of TW, would they then change their, governing faith? Would the religion of the school change?
That's a good point.
So luckily, none of the justices at all went into this question of should TW as an institution have religious rights, and the sort of Hobby Lobby situation. And no Canadian jurisprudence has ever said that. And Malcolm Rowe here, he even went as far as to say, well, there shouldn't be religious institutional rights in Canada. We can only talk about them as individuals because it's human beings believe things, corporations don't.
That seems reasonable to me. So, yeah, it's interesting. So are they going to appeal this?
They can't. So this is the highest court, right?
Right.
So this is as far as it goes. This is now precedent. It's end of the road for them. They've done all the appeals. They can't even really ask Parliament to overrule. I guess they could ask a Parliament to invoke the notwithstanding, but no one's going to do that. essentially TW now has
Bradwell
to
would
make
do
the
that.
decision.
Bradwell would do
Well,
that.
Stephen Harper is going to like raise from the
Saskatchewan did
dead.
recognize it.
Of course they did, yeah. The Saskatchewan government doesn't have any qualms with forcing religion down people's
It's
throats.
not the government, it's the Law Society.
Well, that's true, yeah.
So TW has two choices. It can either amend its covenant to get its law school or, find some way that way, or it can just give up on having a law school. The thing that actually gets interesting, though, is this is the second time TW's been at the Supreme Court of Canada. Back in 2001, they were there arguing about a teacher's college. And in that case, they had an existing part of a teacher's school where people would spend, I think, 2 or 3 years at TW and then go to one of the public universities to just finish off their teacher certificate. And then they could go work in the public school system. And the BC College of Teachers didn't want to give a full approval to TW because they said, well, you're just going to produce a bunch of homophobic bigots.
Yeah.
And they argued that in court, and the Supreme Court of Canada went, well, there's no evidence of that, and you can't prove that, really. And it's pretty much true, because you can have people who come out who are just devout Christians who aren't jerks.
Yeah. Those do exist, believe it or not.
And so you have what looks like the same question hitting the Supreme Court and getting two different answers. And there are differences in some of the facts. And in this one, we did argue a lot more about the input question, I guess, rather than the output. And I think that's where it comes down. But now the question is, now that the court has ruled this way on this case, what does that mean for all the other programs at TWU? What happens if the BC government decides to change the rules on teachers' colleges and say all teaching spaces must be accessible to people of all sexual orientations?
It could potentially undermine the entire university, right?
That's their fear.
That would be such a shame.
Yeah, shucks.
What a loss.
Well, and I've also seen it raised in relation to like Catholic schools across the country that often have statements of faith that are publicly funded, and some of these other kinds of private institutions where, if there is a public accreditation element to it, that public body could say, potentially, like the federal government is doing with the summer jobs program right now, we're not going to give you money if you're discriminating or trying to undermine reproductive rights.
That has affected a lot of people, and so many people. It's affecting my life because we planned a family reunion at a Bible camp in August, and they don't have a full staff because of that lack of funding. And it's interesting to me. I had a really uncomfortable conversation with one of the parents at my daughter's school about that very thing. And she's just like, what? And it was I didn't really know what to say because I respect her and I don't want to,
you don't want to alienate everybody.
Totally.
See, that's your problem. You respect people. Just quit it.
I think I need to stop that. I think that would make my life a little easier.
The thing is, these camps could all still accept the money because the money doesn't say you must support abortion. It just says you won't use it to actively undermine it.
Well, and that was
they're like
my
grandstanding
point.
about it.
That was my point. Like, you can sign it and you don't have to make a public statement or teach, you don't have to teach abortion rights or birth control at your camps. You just have to say, like you said, you're not going to undermine it. And that was my argument. Like, just sign it and get the money.
I mean, I think there's also a good argument that we shouldn't be giving public money to Bible camps in the first place.
I think there's a reasonable argument.
That's also
so maybe there's a nice knock-on effect here, but
that's right.
Now we're
There's a
getting
legal
radical.
argument there.
Mm-hmm. I don't know. It's TWU they were such babies in the media. They came across as like so butthurt, for lack of a better word. Because
it was so incredible being there at the Supreme Court to hear the arguments at the end of November, started December, because TW went there with a hardcore media strategy, whereas like every other intervener and group was just like there with their lawyers. And I was like, I'll do a couple little press things, but like they had volunteers giving out hot chocolate on the second morning to everyone who was waiting to get into the courtroom with backpacks of hot chocolate that had like kegs on their back almost, but hot chocolate. And they said
You can get
Western, they had like
those?
branded scarves.
I want one.
They're making videos.
Did people have to agree that they weren't gay before they got their hot chocolate?
I think I got hot chocolate, and I didn't say. I'm not gay, but
They didn't
would have
ask
told
you.
them. Yeah, they didn't ask
You
me.
took the TW hot chocolate. Hang on here. Back
Was it
track.
good?
Wait a minute.
Are you
sorry.
serious?
Isn't hot
No,
chocolate
I actually
code?
had a Starbucks. I had a Starbucks in my cup already. Yeah,
Oh, sure.
like I would have considered it. I saw a question.
You abstained.
I have the Discord running, and I saw a question in there from Chris, and I want to give a shout out to the Discord channel because I'm assuming you guys want to promote that.
You betcha.
He asked if Canada has similar separation in church and state that the U.S. supposedly does. And what I'll say is the naive look is that we don't, because the U.S. has a very clearly written, establishment clause. But the reality is, well, we've already seen, we can go on at length about the problems in the U.S., but Canada, our Supreme Court has established that Canada is a secular country. Secularism is mentioned multiple times in both the pro and con side of this specific ruling, but the main ruling was a couple of years ago when a municipal prayer case made its way all the way up to the Supreme Court out of Quebec.
Right.
And this was only 2015 in the Saguenay case. And the Supreme Court ruled that the state has a duty of religious neutrality and that it shouldn't promote belief or non-belief to the exclusion of others. And reading that ruling, there's no way you can conclude that our government can be anything other than secular.
Yeah, we in Saskatchewan, we went to our legislative building and handed them a petition with quite a few signatures on it, asking them to stop praying before assembly, and it got shut down. Like it wasn't even up for dispute. They were going to pray regardless of what we wanted.
Yeah, there's still lots of elements of religious privilege in this country. The legislatures can set their own rules, and that court didn't rule on that. But for the most part, the government can't adopt a very pro-religious sentiment without a really good justification.
It's not as bad as the states at all. Like there are states where you can't hold a public position unless you are. They don't specify which God, as long as you just believe in God and you go to church.
Definitely.
Well, Alberta actually still has school prayer on the books.
Right.
So school
but
prayer
nobody
has
cares
never
about
been.
Alberta.
Yeah, I mean, I grew up there. My school didn't pray, but
I grew up there too. That was probably a rift towards me.
No, it was a rift towards Alberta.
We still have it on the books too, do we not?
I don't know. There's a lot of back and forth. Some places do it and some places don't.
But it's like in a
I
law
haven't
that you
looked
can.
at the Saskatchewan one.
I think it's
Yeah,
in
the
law that
Alberta
you
has
can.
religious and patriotic instruction. I know is in there. Almost all school districts don't do it, but there are still a couple that push it through. The thing is, it wouldn't survive a challenge. Like if someone took them to court, just
Right.
parents in small towns don't tend to want to stand up and be like, I'm the atheist, or even just, I'm the Christian who's not like an ass about it.
Except in Saskatchewan, the one person that did stand up is from a small town.
Yeah.
And she's a fantastic person.
Yeah, we've had, I'm not sure whatever happened. I think the school just backed down and it never went anywhere in court.
Yeah.
That's what actually happens a lot, I think, in Canada is we don't tend to get a lot of good church-state jurisprudence because usually it gets worked out. Like there's no rulings in Canada about Alcoholics Anonymous and the religion in that versus there's lots of case law in the States.
Yeah.
I think most of the time people are able to just sort this out before it even gets to the tribunals.
Court's fucking expensive. Like it's so much better if you can just come to an agreement outside of court. Like, I mean, really, maybe you don't get your case law from that, but hey, if you're footing the bill.
Well, that's the beautiful thing about Canada. Loser pays, right? It's
well,
not in a case like TWU here. Everyone's paying except the interveners, but that's our lawyers volunteering their time.
It's certainly not true in family court that the loser necessarily pays. FYI.
Everybody loses
nice
in
to Jen.
family court.
Yeah.
Be nice to Jen. Be nice to Jen. Be nice to Jen. Also, she's a nice person, so be nice to her.
Yeah.
But also, don't lose money.
Yeah. Yeah, I guess when talking about church-state separation, I mean, we still have public funds that go to Catholic schools here in Saskatchewan. And I know other provinces still have that as well. So it's kind of complicated, I guess it's fair to say.
I feel like we're just kind of like getting rid of the shackles of the past. Like, I feel like it's just a process. It's going to take a while, but I feel like it's going in the right direction.
Right.
When I look at the United States, I'm just like, I don't think you're going in the right direction. Like,
Yeah, we've seen even in the past, I say recently, but it's more like past 20, 30 years, both Quebec and Newfoundland disestablished their religious school boards
Right.
and amalgamated it all into one secular system. So it is possible.
Yeah.
Like, it's a constitutional provision that protects the Catholic schools in Canada, but that sounds scary, but actually it's just like the Saskatchewan legislature needs to pass a bill and the federal government just signs it.
Yeah.
And it's the fault of Quebec that it exists, and they don't have it anymore.
It's the founding biculturalism that became multiculturalism of Canada.
Yep.
Yeah.
It's actually, I think, in some ways, what makes Canada a little bit more secular than the US is we were always like two major religions butting heads trying to get along. So there was always this like, now they were both trying to suppress all the Indigenous people and Christianize them, but
Yeah.
Yeah.
they're the Christians, the
Well, you gotta
Catholics
team
and
up once in a
Protestants
while.
fighting. Yeah. The Catholics and Protestants fighting so much meant they went, all right, let's learn how to live together. And from that, they said, well, in the 60s, hey, what if we just lived with everyone, like, peacefully?
So you're saying the Irish should take some notes?
Hey,
Actually,
I've been
Ireland's
to
doing all right
Belfast
these
in
Ireland's
recent
doing
history, and
great.
They're doing great, yeah.
Yeah, that's right. They're working on their blasphemy laws. They just passed the abortion law, or the legalized abortion.
That's
did
right.
you see how happy they all were? Oh my God. It brought a tear to me eye. Sorry, that was irresistible.
That's racist.
Oh my God, this Scottish chick arrived when I was in grad school, and she hated me because I couldn't help like mimicking her accent back to her.
It's because you're not a nice person.
No.
Some people pick it up faster, though.
As a person of Irish descent, I find your
I'm just an asshole.
I find your accent offensive. No,
Do you honestly find that offensive?
no.
Damn it, because I would just speak as an Irish person.
I was thinking 20 some years ago now, I had a friend who spoke in a Scottish accent for like 3 weeks or something. He just always spoke in a Scottish accent. Just decided that he wanted to do that.
Why not? It's a free country.
Yeah, that's what they say.
Piss off all the Scots you want.
Yeah, that's right.
So one of the things this case did do that I found really interesting is in Canadian law, if you're a religious person and you feel your rights been offended, you go before court and you have to pass a test that proves like the government has infringed on your freedom of religion. And that test basically involves not like trying to figure out, because first you have to say that you have a religion, or that your religion was offended or infringed upon, and that you can be an atheist and you can get infringed upon for being an atheist. But what it talks about in the case law is just that you have a sincerely held belief. And the idea there is that religion in Canada, as the courts understand it, isn't some like the Catholic Church says this, therefore you're a Catholic. It's more, I say my religion is Catholic, and to me that means this, and I sincerely believe it. And that means, religion is this inherently personal thing, and so everyone's religion is a bit different. And so I have no problem with that definition. The problem is just when someone says, I sincerely believe this, how do you test that? And what's kind of interesting in here is the 5-judge that wrote the majority decision, they actually look at some of the affidavits filed by prospective TW law students to say, all right, you say that your religion requires you or demands or wants you to go to a school that has a community covenant. But then they actually like quote some of their affidavits and they're like, yeah, it'd be nice to go to that school, but I might consider another one. Or, you know, it might be my first choice. And there are all these like caveated languages. And so the majority talks about how, well, that isn't, you know, if you don't get your first choice, it's not really a severe interference on your
Right.
religion, right?
Yeah.
They actually say the decision, therefore, does not limit religious freedom to a significant extent because a mandatory covenant is not absolutely required to study law in a Christian environment.
Yeah.
In other words, there's no holy book, even in your own version, that says thou shalt go to Christian law school.
Right.
Yeah, exactly.
The majority here still says that religion is infringed upon. And here's where Malcolm Rowe, I think, is a little bit more intellectually consistent, where he says, no, if the majority here is talking about this affidavit evidence that says it's not that important to them, then it's not a religious infringement. And he, through that side for the individuals and through the argument I talked about earlier about organizations not having a religion, he just says religious freedom wasn't infringed in this case. And at that point, he can basically wash his hands and say, yeah, whatever the Law Society decides is reasonable then, because there's no charter infringement.
Mm.
And so his was a very interesting and like strong secular decision to come forward.
Right.
He was sort of alone in making that claim. But given that he's one of the newest justices on the court, it'll be interesting to see if his arguments start to get picked up. Interestingly, the former Chief Justice, Beverly McLaughlin, who's actually just retired, she went the farthest other way on the religious question. She still agreed that the Law Society's decision was reasonable, but she said it was a severe infringement on their religious freedom.
Interesting.
Because, you know, it's not a matter of whether it's optional or mandatory. Infringement is an infringement in her view. So
it seems almost contradictory to think that the Law Society made a reasonable decision and think that it's an infringement on religious freedom, doesn't it?
So in Canada, we're allowed to do reasonable infringements on our rights. That's what Section 1 of the Charter does. No right in Canada is absolute.
Yeah.
And I think that's what helps keep all of these different things in balance. In the US, you don't have that Section 1 that says reasonable limits.
No, your rights are inalienable.
And they butt up against each other. And what do you do at that point? Now, what is reasonable is why we have a court system, and people are going to argue about it for years. But, you know, I think it's a reasonable decision, but maybe I'm biased.
I think it's reasonable too.
I'm definitely biased.
I just marvel at how they think it's their right to exclude people.
Yeah.
And, you know, if you don't play by our rules, you have to, like, it grinds my gears.
I feel like it is more of an extortion than an exclusion, right? Because you could be gay and agree you won't have sex outside of heterosexual
You won't do gay stuff,
marriage. Yeah.
like Ian said. Yeah.
Yeah. You could be, but it's extortion rather than excluding you. You can do it as long as you do whatever they say.
Well, and right after the
Fair.
BC Court of Appeal came out with a really strong decision in TW's favor, what actually started happening was people who are queer at TW started speaking out, or alumni.
There's
and
queer,
people
really?
Yeah, and they talk
That's
about,
interesting.
and what was impressive was the student newspaper, the Mars Hill, actually ran a whole bunch of both named testimonials and some like pseudonymous ones
Right.
of people who were like, yeah, I felt terrible there. Or one person I think even alluded to conversion therapy being offered at that school.
Oh.
So it wasn't like any of them actually got kicked out. I think one person was on the varsity team, but she ended up it came out that she was gay or lesbian, and then she was not picked next year or something. So, but at the same time, I think it's kind of an open secret at the school that the covenant isn't really so much enforced as it is like guidelines that they selectively enforce if they like you or not.
Right.
Sounds like the church.
Yeah.
I mean, there used to be a Bible college in our city, and I knew people that went there, and they found ways to get around that covenant that they ultimately had to sign. They did stuff.
Use different. They don't do the traditional.
No.
They don't know each other biblically.
No. But there were people, I know there was
Sometimes
somebody that
something
got
biblical
kicked
is
out.
good. Sorry, what?
Someone did get kicked out because they were caught
Interesting.
Oh.
getting to know
caught.
someone biblically or something. Yeah. There's
Also,
a
I wanna
reason
So
go-
when
the
you asked
tower.
me to do Bible studies the other day, what did that mean, Angela? No.
Wouldn't you like to know?
I love that term, getting to know somebody biblically, because Cain really got to know Abel biblically with a fucking knife
We got into the Bible, but
was it a knife?
biblical?
I thought it was a rock.
or whatever.
I think it was a rock too.
Yeah, it was definitely a rock.
There's a reason that the tower on that Bible
That's okay,
Bible
though.
college campus was called
Because
the Erection.
I don't-
There was
I
a
don't-
reason.
I don't think it actually happened. So it's
It might have happened.
Wait,
like a version of
It's
it might
not
have
a
happened.
literal thing? What?
I don't think it actually.
brother killed another
does that mean
brother? It could
getting to
happen.
know somebody biblically means you just have to
Anyways.
kind of fake it?
You make up what you know about them.
Anyway, I'm just
Yeah.
surprised that they really had like a gay community at Trinity Western, just because like you'd think it would just be just such a hostile environment. Like as a gay person, you'd never get anywhere close because just Jesus.
Well, but you
All
have to
the time.
remember, it's a university that's fed largely from evangelical private schools. So the kids who get there might not even realize they're gay, or might not even know gay is a thing until they
Wow.
get to university. And because you have to think about like some of the small towns that can feed into this school,
Yes.
and the people who come from like an evangelical private school, and you know they've never really actually had proper sex ed, and everything is
I guess,
sin.
yeah. My son just finished
And that's-
Pride Week at his elementary school. He's like, Mom, I
Aw.
love Pride Week. It's amazingly fun.
That's awesome.
Good for you, kid. Can I wear my rainbow shirt today? Sure.
It
Sounds
is
just like Loki.
it is something like that. I think is super cool. Is that schools here celebrate Pride, like elementary schools?
Yeah,
and
I
public
had no
schools.
idea that was a thing here, and I'm so
Yeah.
so pleased, and it was
It
so
was
nice.
not a thing when I was growing up.
No, not at all. And like, I went to Catholic school, and it was sort of like it was just like an insult to call somebody gay. Like they never really talked about
Yeah.
it and sex ed,
Right.
but it was just sort of understood that that's the bad thing. Like,
Yeah.
and so now
Like
it's so different. And
TV show Freaks and Geeks.
I don't remember this, but
That's like how it was when we grew up.
Yeah.
Like,
Yeah.
right. And so it was just like, I mean, I went to the Pride Parade last weekend with my kid, and it was just so nice to just, I don't know, just see the show of love and support in Regina for that. It was really cool because it was really nice to expose my kid to that because it was not like that when I was.
It's nice to see people
Yeah.
not be bigots and assholes for one day of the year.
Well, I mean, I'm sure the bigots and assholes just stayed away from the parade, right? I mean, like,
yeah.
Also, I want to go back to this comment. I think it was Angela had about why can they be able to exclude people from their community? And I think that's a very tempting argument to go down.
Is
But
it?
It's actually, well, yeah. I mean, we all want to think about it, like, because it's them. Why should
Yeah.
they get to do this? But
Yeah.
actually it is, associational rights. And it's sort of like, if we have a little atheist group, we want to be atheists in, we should be able to exclude a Christian if we want. The issue that came up here is that they came into the public square and wanted to open a law school that requires, a government approval,
Yeah.
and they're accessing it. So it's a
Okay.
subtle difference, right? So a church
Yeah.
can exclude
Yeah.
all the gay people it want. And the Supreme Court actually just decided that a couple weeks ago in a case called Highwood, where there was this group of Jehovah's Witnesses in Calgary where they disfellowed someone, and because he drank or something, as you do in Jehovah's Witnesses.
As you do. Yeah.
And because of the disfellowship, he was a realtor, and he lost all his business
What?
because the only people he knew are Jehovah's Witnesses, and it's kind
Somebody
of a
would have
cult.
got
So
all
they
the JW business.
Yeah.
Oh,
and it went to
no.
zero. So he appealed through the internal processes, which is you complain to your church leadership, then you get the neighboring church leadership to hear the case, and then he still felt like he didn't get a fair trial. So he actually asked the Alberta Court of Queen's bench to intervene or judicial review it, and got all the way up to the Supreme Court because
Wow.
I think the Alberta courts actually sided with him. They went, yeah, there's been a fundamental injustice done here, and so they should have to be your friends again or something. And then the Supreme Court's like, no, it's a private group. Go away. We don't have any right to like intervene here.
Huh.
And so because it's just like a private church, they upheld that the legal mechanism that he used, judicial review, has no place like looking into your private societies. There are other things, like if they had abused him or he had a contract with them, there are still legal recourses, but the Supreme Court in that one sided very heavily with like organized religion in a way.
Okay.
I mean, it was sort of a technical thing that they just went, we don't want to deal with this.
Yeah.
But,
That's
there
interesting.
can be cases where, those associational rights are important. And it is in the charter that we have the freedom of association. That one actually doesn't get used that much as opposed to the others. It's generally union rights, but
I wasn't aware of the associational rights. But
yeah, a few people are. It's what actually gives us good union strengths, and it's why collective bargaining is pretty protected in Canada. But that's another podcast, I'm sure.
Well, and the separation of church and state has to benefit both sides, right? It has to go both ways, too.
Yeah. So
like the church has to be protected from influence by the government.
Yeah, and the one thing Canadian courts really don't want to do, and this goes back to that testing the sincerity of belief, they don't want to be the arbiters of religious law. And like in this Jehovah's Witness case, they don't want to be trying to decide if the Jehovah's Witnesses interpreted the biblical law correctly and how they like disciplined him.
Right.
Like, no, that's go away.
Yeah.
Well, and that makes a really good point. That's interesting.
Yeah, have the government be deciding how biblical law should be interpreted.
Oh man.
I feel like our podcast would be better with a religious person on it. Like, I want like somebody respectful who jokes around with us, blah blah blah. But I want like a fun Mormon on here.
A fun Mormon.
Woman.
I don't think those two words go together.
Yeah.
I don't know.
Can he be excommunicated
From being on the podcast, probably.
from being a Mormon?
I think we know a few of those.
We gotta
You
find
can
one.
be.
I'm just
Yeah,
saying.
you can.
No.
Oh, yeah,
I
yeah.
mean, for our show, for your fun religious person.
Do you want them to be excommunicated or no?
Because I can bring
he has
one on
someone
the
in
show
mind.
that's
Sure,
excommunicated.
yeah. No, oh, I
Yeah.
see you have someone in mind.
Yeah,
Yeah, I
his
just think it'd
name's
be
Alden.
fun. I mean, that would be fun. I actually think somebody who like was still in the church would be funner, but
He's the guy that's Destin sucks or whatever.
he's
Oh,
Destin sucks.
Alden?
Yeah. Yeah, he got himself excommunicated from the Mormon church.
I don't.
It took a
I don't
long
think
time.
he would count as a religious person that we'd be bringing
No.
onto the show.
No.
But so I guess before, just as a wild offshoot, before we let you go, I'm curious what you think of the Jordan Peterson suing Wilfrid Laurier University over defamation.
So the first thing I'm looking for is Ontario has what's called an anti-slap law, which is this way that's supposed to protect the public against frivolous libel lawsuits and defamation lawsuits. And it'll be interesting to see if that works, because to win a defamation case, you generally need to prove and defamation cases aren't actually that easy to win in Canada. And if you do win, you don't tend to get that much money. So they're not usually worthwhile.
Right.
Now, there's still a high chance that Wilfrid Laurier will settle, because that's what big institutions tend to do when given lawsuits, and everyone signs an NDA and goes away. But there's a pretty high chance that, given that I don't think his reputation has suffered at all, or that he can make a quick, easy case, and I think it's against the public participation, or, it's against the public interest to let this go through, because he's on the record in, I think the National Post is saying he's doing this to tell other professors to not criticize him.
Yeah.
If the Ontario law, which has been held up by civil liberties groups in this country as, a good standard for what we have for anti-slap laws, if that can't knock this out of court, I'm a little worried. And BC is actually in the process of adopting our own anti-slap law, modeled after Ontario's. So,
yeah,
I don't think it's genuine. Let's say.
Yeah. Jesse Brown from Canada Land put out a Twitter thread today about how he kind of gave a few reasons about why he figures Peterson is going through this lawsuit.
What's his argument? What's Peterson's argument?
He, I think, is just saying that he was defamed and that it hurt his reputation. But
so he's complaining about this. He's complaining about the professors who talked about him to Lindsay Shepherd in that private meeting. Now, there's the claim out there that that Lindsay Shepherd released this, and therefore it's really her who made it defamation. But defamation is technically only communicating about someone to a third party, malicious false statement. So the professors telling Lindsay Shepherd mean what he considers false things about her would be defamation. It would be slander.
Yeah.
The fact that it got released later. Now, it's still a big reach because what was the harm to his reputation?
Yeah. If anything,
she liked him
it
before and she
him.
really likes him now.
Yeah, that's right. Jesse Brown kind of goes through a few tweets, but he ultimately says that this is specifically an attack on anybody who criticizes him. Like, it's meant to shut down criticism. And I can't see any other reason why he would do this, but.
I mean, he's the guy who wanted to start a database of postmodern professors to single out at universities.
Right.
So.
And he doesn't want the word diversity used in schools in Canada. Like,
oh shit.
Yeah. Doesn't. So.
I haven't seen specific commentary from him, but I think there is one video of him commenting on the Trinity Western University decision, and I'll give you one guess at which side he's on.
Yeah. Yeah, I don't doubt that, actually. That doesn't surprise me. I guess we will go to another break and we will let you go. Thanks for joining us and breaking down this kind of for us and chatting about wherever we went with it.
No problem. Can I leave you with one more quote from the decision that I think leaves us on a better note than Jordan Peterson?
You bet.
Please.
All right. So the majority writes, the Law Society's decision, which is to reject TWU's law school, prevents the risk of significant harm to the LGBTQ people. Actually, funny note, this is the first time the acronym LGBTQ has ever been used by the Supreme Court of Canada, and nowhere in this decision do they define it.
Of course.
So the decision prevents risk of significant harm to LGBTQ people who feel they have no choice but to attend TWU's proposed law school. These individuals would have to deny who they are for 3 years to receive a legal education. Being required by someone else's religious beliefs to behave contrary to one's sexual identity is degrading and disrespectful.
There you go.
Also, I wouldn't want to go to a law school that can't win in court.
Right?
Good point.
Right. No, perfect.
All right.
Thanks
Thank
again.
you so much.
No problem. Thanks for having me.
Have a good one.
Take care.
All right, let's go to another break. For everything else, you can check out the show notes at thebrainstormpodcast.com and our website, brainstormblog.net. Thanks to our financial supporters, Janet, Stephanie, Zach, the Utah Outcasts, Bassett, Will, Aaron, Daryl, Destin Sucks, Bob, Glenn, Destin doesn't suck that much, Magnus, several species of small furry animals gathered together in a cave, Positively Skeptical, Rob, Julie, Chris, and Larry. If you want to join them and help the show grow, then you can do that at patreon.com/brainstormpodcast. Or you can go and buy some stuff at tpublic.com/stores/brainstorm-podcast-gear. You can join us as we start live shows back up again on brainstormradio.net in August. August 31st is our next show. And our guest will be BJ Mendelsohn, author of The End of Privacy, which is a book about the end, like online privacy and the ways in which our data is used. I want to thank Matthew for joining us. You can find his stuff at facebook.com/therealcrediblehulk. So make sure to check that out. Thanks, Dave, for our intro music. Thanks to Aaron Rabbi from the Embrace the Void podcast for doing the intro voiceover. You can find his stuff at voidpod.com. Thanks to Alex Capper-Murdoch for doing the voiceover for our ads, and thanks to Jason Camo for our outro music. You can find his stuff at loststateofmind.com. All music played is either with permission or under the SOCAN license to play. For more information on SOCAN, you can check out the music license info page on our website, brainstormblog.net. Remember to give us a rating, a thumbs up, or a fave on your podcatcher of choice. Join our Facebook group, like our page, follow us on Twitter, share the show, and spread the word. For live listeners, stick around for the after show. You can go to brainstormafterhours.com and listen to the bonus content before it goes patron only. Thanks for listening, and remember, the truth matters.
This is an opinion-based podcast. Each person on the podcast is responsible for their own opinions, and those opinions don't necessarily reflect the views of the rest of the panel. Any guests or anyone associated with the people on the podcast, such as spouses, partners, children, other family members, friends, or employers. No one person speaks for the podcast with the possible exception of Cory, and he doesn't speak for anyone else on the show. The Brainstorm podcast does not represent the views of our sponsors.
We just wanted to say thanks to everyone who listens to us, shares the show, gives us a rating on iTunes or Stitcher, or supports us through Patreon and Gumroad. We don't have a lot of interactions with our listeners, but what we have had proves that we attract some of the best people around. Smart, kind, and cool. An audience truly worthy of the titles hardcore and woo-free. Thanks for helping us make the world a smarter place.